Welcome to CUFIS Network.
Welcome to another episode of CUFIS Network. I'm Danial Surti, the marketing co-director of CUFIS, and today I've got the pleasure of hosting Pras Kannan. Pras is an undergraduate engineering degree, which, full disclaimer, was at Oxford, but he did do a master's at Cambridge, so he redeems himself in my book. Then he went on to join the finance world, first doing a summer internship at Goldman Sachs, and then converting that to a full-time position. After that, he joined the non-profit world before finally founding his own FinTech startup, Native Finance. On top of that, he's been involved with numerous mentorship and social mobility platforms, most recently being a trustee of Decathlon. Prass, it's a pleasure to have you on. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Thank you to CUFIS as well for having me.
It's a pleasure. Why don't we just start right at the beginning of your career? So you graduated, was in 2008, just before the recession kind of got really big.
So I interned at Goldman Sachs just in 2008. We were called the Lehman Babies because when we were interns, Lehman existed and then Lehman disappeared overnight. And I guess from that internship time, just to show you how crazy it was, we were told at the end of the internship, you'll find out in a couple of weeks if you got the job. And then 2 weeks pretty much to the day, on a Sunday, I remember, Lehman went under. And I guess, I don't know what you guys read about it, but it was a huge shock. Like the week before Lehman went under, I was at an event at Lehman Brothers where a partner at Lehman was saying, no, Lehman won't go under. It's just rumors, it's just press speculation. And I think, no one saw it happening when it did, as quickly as it did. And so, that Sunday, the Monday we were supposed to find out about whether we got offers from Goldman. And on the Sunday, Lehman went under. Goldman and Morgan Stanley switched to bank holding companies. Merrill got bought by Bank of America. And pretty much overnight, there were no official investment banks left on Wall Street in just the space of about 24 hours. And so we didn't find out for months and months whether we got hired. In fact, I remember I was actually, as you pointed out, for all the Cambridge listeners, you can say I redeemed myself for going to Cambridge for my master's. But I remember getting the call, funny enough, in the Sainsbury's opposite Sydney, Sussex. It was almost November, right, where I got this call saying, do you want to join Goldman Sachs? And so it was a bit of a crazy time. I was one of the lucky ones who was able to get an offer at that. But the incoming analyst class in my year, normally Goldman would hire about 120 or so people into securities and IBD. In my year, it was actually only about 30 hires initially. And then they did a second hiring phase a bit later on. Like I said, now with everything that's going on, it puts everything into perspective. It doesn't seem as bad. I think the thing then, the difference between then and now is then I think if you were in finance, you were in the sort of eye of the hurricane and it seemed crazy. Whereas I think now it's affecting all sort of walks of life pretty much.
Yeah, so I mean, as you say, that pandemic, that recession was quite different to the one today. But do you think kind of there's some key lessons you learn, applying for a job or kind of converting that summer internship that students could benefit from learning today?
Yeah, loads. And I think, because it's been 12, 13 years hence, I've got a lot of perspective on it. I think one of the big mistakes I think I made, and a lot of people who went into the Goldmans, McKinseys, the BCGs, the JP Morgans, or whatever, I think there's a sort of, the allure is very clear. I think it's less so these days, right? And I think it's not difficult to feel slightly, arrogance is not the right word, but if you've got a job at one of these high-flying institutions, you feel like you've made it, and maybe some of your fellow students haven't got those jobs, and you sort of feel like, I've got something that they wouldn't want, or that they should have, or whatever. And it's interesting with hindsight because, so a friend of mine who was at Cambridge, he went straight into the startup world, right? And back in those days, there were no real startups, right? And to just kind of give you an interesting parallel, I was at Goldman as an analyst. I was making 6 figures before I was 25. I was making more than my dad ever made, or whatever, all these things, which you thought was a great thing, at least in the financial sense. And my friend, I won't name who he was, but he was struggling to start up for about 5-6 years. We'd catch up and he'd be telling about his, difficulties and stuff with work, and I sort of feel like, oh, look at me, I'm doing quite well. I didn't, not in an arrogant way, but in my head, I'm sort of like, oh, okay, I've kind of done it the right way almost. And then, like I said, because I've been in the industry for a while, I've left university a while ago, you get a sense of perspective because my friend, him and three guys are setting up this company in the gaming world, and their company got bought out by King, the big gaming company who do Candy Crush, etc. And he ended up making almost like $1.5 million from the sale, right? So 6 years on, he's gone from startup guy, living off ramen to suddenly having $1.5 million in the bank. And then suddenly he's telling me, there's some tax thing which means that if I go traveling for 2 years, I basically pay $300K less in tax. So I'm going to be a digital nomad and just go traveling for 2 years and do occasional consulting work on the computer. And suddenly I was like, oh, okay. And so I think the kind of big advice I'd give is that obviously people go into finance, and a lot of my friends who went in are there and enjoy it. And I think a lot of it depends on which desk you get and which team you're with, and that can have a huge kind of impact on how much you enjoy it. But I think don't necessarily think that that's the only road, and also don't think that people on less conventional roads aren't going to succeed, because it's interesting, in the longer run, people went to top unis succeed in different ways. And so I think, don't be closed-minded as well, I'll say. And I think that's a mistake I made as well, right? I think I was so focused on, getting into like a Goldman and seeing it as a sort of getting there as an achievement in itself, but really it's not. It's just the beginning of the long journey.
So yeah, going back to your time at Goldman, what do you think some of the kind of key advantages and disadvantages were of working in that corporate world?
I guess the first thing to say is the world is very different now than it was then, right? And I think I don't actually know how attractive or unattractive those sort of things are anymore. I mean, I read in the press a lot about how Goldman's lost its shine, etc. I don't know if that's actually translating into how graduates and students are, kind of viewing Goldman. I think the thing is, back in those days, it was Goldman and McKinsey were sort of this, sort of like mysterious, sort of high-profile institutions that you were almost privileged to be asked to join them, right? To a sense, I think the reality now is JP Morgan is the best investment bank on the street, right? So clearly, Goldman's not the best bank anymore. I don't know if it still has that allure though. And so I think, in terms of Goldman specifically, I don't regret it at all. No, I mean, I'm still very grateful to work there, and I think I have a lot of respect for it as an institution. And again, as I said, things might have changed, but the reality was, when I was there, so I was on the trading floor, I was a sales analyst. At other banks, what should have been a 7, because it's a 7 a.m. start, don't forget, to 5 or 6 p.m. job at Goldman was a 7 to sometimes 11 midnight 1 a.m. job, right? And so because their model, or the top tier banks, their model is underhire and overpay, right? And it's a very very simple business model in the sense that because they have this prestige, they can attract the best talent, they can work them harder than other places, they can pay them less, and ultimately the profits recruit more to the partners, right? But the idea is eventually you become, or the directors, and the idea is eventually you become one of those people. But I think for me, I have huge respect for it as an institution. I was always really fascinated by the market, so I'm really glad I did it. I learned a lot. But I think for me, a number of things that, firstly, when the going is tough and, you're working from 7 till 11, taking your free box of food and watching an episode of The West Wing for your 1 hour of fun every day for weeks on end, it's just a bit depressing. And so, some people are able to get through that because they want the money or the prestige or whatever. But unfortunately for me anyway, at least in a monetary sense, my brain is just not wired in that way. That's just not what makes me tick enough for me to sustain that over a long term. And I think the other thing as well is when we joined, the senior people in the industry were telling us how the industry is dying, and so you didn't feel comfortable signing up for a long-term career in an industry which you thought might not exist. Now, I think you guys are in a slightly better position because obviously it's not what it was, but equally it's not going to disappear anytime soon. And actually now, the working hours are less intense and there's been some changes. So in a way, it's a bit better now because you don't necessarily have to work so hard as we did. But no, I definitely don't regret it. And as I said, I respect them highly.
So when you ended up leaving, did you say you went traveling or?
Yes, so I basically tried to quit about a year and a half in, and I got given like an extended 3-week kind of holiday to think about it again. I won't go into the details because the partner who's involved is quite a well-known, lively guy. So he said it in slightly blunter American words, let's put it that way. But then I then took a bit of time out, and then I kind of reassessed the situation and was like, okay, I'll make associate this time, my bonuses will be this time, so I'll stick it out for another couple of years. And then about 3 or 4 months in, I just realized I just lost the sort of passion for it, and I just decided I'd rather leave on my own terms than just become not so good at the job. And also I just didn't know what I wanted to do. So I basically, the second time around when I tried to quit, they actually were really nice about it. They actually gave me a bit of like a golden goodbye, essentially, like because I was leaving the industry full stop to go traveling. They kind of said, thanks for everything. And then I went traveling for about 6 or 7 months, which was great, but didn't really help me that much in terms of what I want to do. All I got to was, okay, I'll go back into banking and then get to VP and then go traveling again. That's basically the extent of my life plan. And then so when I came back, when I left, they said, okay, when you come back, you can kind of join the team again if you'd like. But when I came back, the situation had changed. The market was this was about 2012 now, so the market was even more on its knees essentially because of the European sovereign crisis. And so, I was applying for finance jobs and I was getting a couple of interesting interviews with some PE funds and things like that. But I don't know, at that time, I just sort of realized, like, okay, you weren't that happy to begin with. Why not look at other things? And so by chance, I stumbled upon an opportunity, a foundation in social investment. My master's thesis at Cambridge was actually on microfinance. I was born in India, and I've always had an interest in more sort of social-minded things, and this seemed quite an interesting opportunity. So it was at the Elton John AIDS Foundation, so Elton John's charitable foundation. And to be honest, I just sort of applied on a sort of a whim. I was like, okay, it seems interesting. I didn't really know what it was about, and it just sort of accelerated quite quickly, and to the point where I had the offer from the foundation, and I actually was supposed to meet the CEO of a fund to join them a few weeks later, and the foundation was like, "Come on, like, what are you interested or no? You're not." And so I was caught in two minds, right? But then I decided to take the leap, and yeah, it was a great opportunity. It was a great time. I think I'll be honest, and I think for a while I was questioning whether I made the right decision, just because when I joined, I was in my mid-20s or so. My friends were still analysts in banking, right? And then suddenly a few years later, they're VPs, and the sort of gap in sort of earnings and things like that, it became a lot more pronounced. I mean, the other thing was also, I found things about the non-profit world that I didn't necessarily like either, and that's not necessarily about the work they do. Is more around the fact that I think you take things for granted, right? And in finance and consulting and places like, you take for granted that everyone you work with, generally speaking, are very driven, very motivated. You take for granted that although there's a lot of office politics, that in mostly speaking, it's meritocratic. And in the real world, that's not how things work, right? In the real world, how things work are you do something for 10, 15 years and you are a managerial level candidate, right? It doesn't matter how smart you are, how hard you work. And so I think, without criticizing the non-profit world too much, it is in essence a lot of how that part of the world works. And so that's why suddenly I was a bit frustrated there as well, because I was sort of like, okay, I really like what I'm doing, but this is I don't want to just do this for and then it's unfortunate actually. I think it's even when I was at Goldman, I was thinking, okay, and I don't know if you guys have been on the trading floor, but you have hundreds, sometimes thousands of people working hard, trying to make money. And I remember thinking, these people would they'd work as hard to make money at different rules. As in, if it was the trading floor was geared towards limiting CO2 emissions, and you got a huge bonus for doing that, they would do that, right? And so I just wondered the whole time, how do you harness that energy for more sort of positive outcomes? And I guess unfortunately, in like the non-profit world, that's the other way around, where everyone wants to do good things, but there's not necessarily that drive and that incentivization. And so it's definitely a space I'll go into in the longer run, or when I'm slightly older. But I think, as I said about perspective, I think I was a bit naive before going into that sector. I thought, I don't know, like banking bad, charity good, or something. And it's not quite like that. It's a lot more nuanced and a lot more, a lot messier in real life.
Yeah, you actually took my next question. Kind of, you already answered. I was going to ask if kind of the non-profit world was everything you hoped it would be. So I guess that's kind of, there was a bit of a naive understanding, and then kind of you got to see a bit more of the realities, I guess.
Yeah. And look, I think I'm probably being a bit harsh. I mean, so I think another thing working in that world is you get quite desensitized to the work you're doing, and just the impact you're having, right? So like during my time at the foundation, I launched one of the first social impact bonds for HIV in the world, right? I designed one of the first programs for adolescents and young people in Zimbabwe for HIV. We were reaching, I managed a grants portfolio of about $30 million. So we were reaching literally thousands of people and helping them, with their lives and potentially saving many lives as well. So it's not to criticize that world entirely, but I think, to your point, I guess, because I've had a few career starts, I think for me, and it depends what you want personally, I think for me, I'm not from money. I would like to earn money, but I'd also like to do something positive, right? And I think what I'm doing now, which is the FinTech space, seems to be a good sort of intersection of those two things. And I think that's partly why I probably have taken a while to figure out what fits for me. It's just, I think for me personally, I miss the drive and the sort of pressure in a positive way that came from finance. And the great thing about running a fintech startup is you have all those things, for good or bad.
Kind of just going back to this idea of kind of figuring out what you want to do. So you've had quite a few different kind of career paths. Do you think, almost to an extent, you kind of need that trial and error to figure out what you need to do, or is it kind of luck of the draw, or how do you think you should go about figuring out what you want to do?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, and I think that's so true, right? So I think so true in that I think both those things have some merits to what you're saying, which is, for example, in my experience, the only reason I went to sales, right, I wanted to be a trader, was because this VP said, "Oh, you're a talkative guy, but you do engineering, so you should be in sales because you'd be amazing at sales, right? You can talk, but you understand maths." And I hated being in sales, right? And actually, if I'd gone to trading, maybe I'd have loved it. And on the luck of the draw thing, I think that's definitely true in everything, right? My analogy, even with what we do, is it's sort of kites in the wind, which is you can work really hard and put yourself out there, but ultimately you need that good fortune to really kind of do well. And this is very, very true for startups, right? For example, for our startup, this whole crisis has been a net positive, but if we hadn't done our most recent funding round when we did, if we did it a few months later, we would be out of business maybe, and so there's a lot of luck involved for sure. So I think that's luck of the draw is huge, and I think why it's great that you guys are engaged and switched on is, I think at your age and your point in life, very small decisions can have huge impacts, right? It's sort of like if you look at, I don't know, it's like a trajectory, right? That's a small deviation now at your point in your life you can end up there instead of here. And so I think the small instances, I'd say, are huge. But I guess equally, for me at least, having perspective definitely helps. And it's sort of like peripheral vision in that if you're only in one career, that's all you know. And I think definitely having two career kind of experiences or more rounds your experience and then gives you a lot of perspective. The challenge, though, the downside is if you switch a bit too much, then by the time you're my age, it's harder to put together a very clear and seamless CV where there's a very clear thread. So don't underestimate how hard it is to switch careers, I'd say. And ideally try to figure it out very early and right at the start, but it's not always possible. And the great thing now is switching is not as big a burden as it was in previous generations. So I think to your question, I think luck is huge, and I think more than luck, it's actually the decisions you guys make in the years to come will have huge impacts on your careers and ones that you won't be able to realize until 5-10 years from now.
Do you think kind of with making those decisions, it's quite helpful to kind of talk to people, to have mentors? I know you're involved with quite a few of these mentorship programs. So kind of to that end, what do you think kind of the best way is to find a mentor? I know a lot of students kind of struggle with that.
No, that's a great question. So apart from my day job, I'm a trustee at a charity called Decade On, and what you kind of pointed to is exactly why we set up the charity, which is we try to link mentees at university or recent graduates with mentors, as the name suggests, like a decade on, hence, in their chosen career field. And the reason for that, and I guess to answer your question, is a lot of people don't necessarily have parents or family members that they can lean on to get advice. And particularly people from less privileged backgrounds, we think can really benefit from a mentor who's be able to dispel a lot of myths around careers. And to give a sort of example, my fiance and I were getting married next year. When we hopefully have children, we'll be able to tell them, this is what a strategy consultant does. This is what private equity is. This is what hedge. I had no idea what any things were, and I wasn't even. To be honest, I wish I was a bit more engaged at uni in terms of finance, assessing and stuff. I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I didn't even know anything, to be honest. But the problem was I couldn't ask my dad or mom or an uncle. I'm the first person in my family to go to Oxbridge, and what decent or top 2 uni, let alone Oxbridge, really. So a lot of it was trying to figure it out on my own, which I think made it harder, and I think I definitely would have appreciated a mentor who could have given me career guidance. So I'd really recommend it, and also if you are lucky enough to have family members who could advise you, I'd take them up on it. Maybe you have that annoying uncle who's in VC who you don't like talking to, but I'd say suck it up and speak to that person and get their advice, because a lot of the challenge for me anyway when I was at university is just trying to understand these professions by reading about them. You're trying to get a theoretical grasp of these professions, but there's no one out there able to just tell you what it is, right? The reality is, if you're a strategy consultant, you're going to be doing a lot of pitch decks, right? And you're going to be up till 3 a.m. doing a lot of PowerPoint. And so, having a mentor can dispel these things, just tell you how it is, and then tell you, the non sort of filtered HR version of what these industries are really about.
And kind of as a mentor, what do you kind of recommend for mentees to do in terms of kind of fostering that relationship with the mentor, the types of questions to ask? I know a lot of students are a bit kind of curious, a bit not too sure on how to approach that relationship.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, to be honest, in my experience, mentees are actually like really, they always tend to surprise me in a positive way in terms of how well read they are and how inquisitive they are. And so I'd say actually mentees are pretty well prepared in terms of their questions and things like that. I think the one piece of advice I would give, just based on my own experience, is maybe focus more on whether those industries really are for you, or those sort of more fundamental questions. For example, I've had a couple of mentees who you can tell that they've been wanted to be in banking since they're 15 or something, and often it's like recent immigrants to this country or whatever, and they seem so sure of it. So because they seem so sure of it, I don't really question them or put any doubt in their minds. But I don't know, it almost seems too certain, right, at that sort of age. And so I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier about having more of an open mind. Like when we left uni, the smart move was to go into tech, right? So for example, Tom Blomfeld, CEO, who's formerly CEO of Monzo, now the chairman, he was one of those guys who went more into the startup route quite early on, right? But back then it wasn't clear that was the winning ticket, as it were, versus finance, right? And so I guess it's probably tech again this time, but maybe there's some other sector that we just don't know. Maybe it's energy and climate change related stuff or whatever, right? And so I think definitely, I think mentees are quite clued up in terms of the industry they're interested in. But I think, for me, I'm always sort of thinking, okay, are they sure about this? And maybe more around figuring out what you want to achieve in your career on a fundamental level is what I would suggest.
Moving on to your kind of your startup right now, could you just tell us a bit more about your startup, the story behind it? Was there some sort of kind of unique moment, or?
Well, so it was. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. So our startup, for Native Finance, we're the first tech platform for real estate finance. So we look at essentially the B2B side of real estate finance. So everything that's not a mortgage. So that's things like development finance. So finance to actually build buildings, investment financing to buy a hotel, you want to borrow against that, or bridging finance, or just more shorter-term property-related lending. Huge market space. So 60 billion in new loans every year in the UK, no tech or data at all. And there's a reason why I think 10 years ago, you didn't need a tech solution in that space, simply because you could just rely on the relationships you had. Whereas nowadays, it's a much more fragmented, much more complex world. So we're trying to build the first tech platform in that space in the UK. So we were the first in Europe, and now there are a couple of people trying to catch up with us. But we've done about 80 million through the platform. We're backed by Passion Capital, quite a big VC in that world. So they're the biggest investors in Monzo and Tide and Danial and Go Carlos and all these guys. Yeah, we've kind of got to quite a good position, and we've done quite well to get to where we are today. But it's not been easy, right? And I think in terms of how it started, it wasn't a eureka moment. To be honest, it happened really quickly. We started speaking to a few VCs, and fundraising is very challenging, and you get no's all the time, and it's a no, and then suddenly it's a yes very quickly. And so that's kind of what happened with Passion. So to the point where I asked to shorten my notice period with my previous job to be able to start sooner. But the idea we had initially has morphed and transformed so many times. And changed so much over the years. So it wasn't a eureka moment. And I don't think that's necessarily true of all startups. I think some tech companies obviously have eureka moments, Google and PageRank, for example. And there's just different journeys for different tech companies. But I think a lot of tech companies have quite messy, quite iterative journeys. So for us, it's been an amazing journey, but it's been tough as well. And I'd argue in a way tougher than banking. Not in terms of hours, not in terms of just sheer, endurance in that regard. But I think the most challenging bit of it is your brain is a problem solver, and when it's your own business, it just can't stop thinking about that problem. When you work for someone else, you can go to the pub on a Friday and go to sleep or whatever. With this, you just cannot switch off. And even if sometimes on a Friday, I'll try and go to sleep at like 10 to try and get rest because I've had a long week. And it doesn't matter. I'm still dreaming about, whatever, pitching to an investor or something, and so I think I probably haven't slept properly in about 5 years, who knows? But equally, having said that, and I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier it's about what you want to do. I think now I realize that this is what I've always wanted to do, which is to create something, to build something of my own. And so for me, it is what I need to do, even if it is challenging. But it's not for everyone else either. And so, so in terms of the journey and how we got here, we've made pretty much every mistake possible. But, in the tech world, or in this world, survival is the first key metric. So although we haven't, we're not a $1 billion business, and it's been slower going than we'd like, we're still here and we're still scaling. So let's see how things evolve from here.
So you kind of mentioned these up and down and what's kept you motivated, but at the same time, kind of the skills you've had throughout your career, what kind of key skills do you think you've built throughout your career that you've used in this tech space?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think the reality is, in the tech world, and I guess generally as well, anyone who works in finance will tell you this, America is the premiership, right, or the Premier League of tech and finance as well. And I guess China is now catching up in some respects, less so with finance because of their closed economy, definitely in tech. So for hardware now, China is the number one destination. For everything else, it's still America. The only vertical where Europe's doing really well, and particularly UK, is FinTech. The UK is probably the number one country in the world for FinTech. Last year, I think the UK had more VC funding in FinTech than any other country, which is pretty remarkable given California's economy is bigger than the UK, right? So whether you like it or not, if you're based in Britain or you are British and you want to go into tech, going into FinTech is probably a good idea, or doing something in that realm. And so I think definitely this is where the Goldman and that whole experience has been super helpful. And when I went into that world, I was joking at the time to my mates at uni. I was like, oh, I'm going to do my master's in finance and then do something else. I literally said, I'll do my master's in finance and I'm going to go traveling and do something else. And I think I must have known that's what I want to do, but because that is what I ended up doing. But that's what I mean in terms of it is almost like a master's in finance, right? And so I think if you want to go into FinTech specifically, actually going to one of these top 2 institutions is a great training. And it's interesting, no matter how long you leave that world, you have this level of understanding that your regular person just will never have. So I think definitely that finance knowledge has been really helpful in what I do if I do, because I'm in the FinTech world. Having said that, health tech is another big sort of area. Obviously machine learning, AI, and all that stuff is doing quite well, and there's DeepMind, etc. So the UK is leading in some other fields as well. But so I think definitely for me the finance side, and I think the advice I'd give to someone who is interested in tech and startups, etc. If you have an industry vertical where you're very passionate about that particular industry and there's an opportunity there, getting that solid training and that apprenticeship essentially is very valuable. Coming back to our example, we're a real estate fintech. Neither my co-founder or I knew anything about real estate, to be honest. My co-founder is an ex-McKinsey guy. We knew that property is expensive and unaffordable, but that's pretty much it, right? And the first couple of years, we essentially were doing our masters in real estate almost, right, and trying to understand this industry. And it's fine. And a lot of successful tech founders don't know that much about their industries and learn on the job and learn as they go along. But I think the best, well, not the best, but probably the least painful businesses in that world are where you understand the industry and are able to spot a gap and able to hit the ground running. So that's kind of my advice. It's if you want to do a health tech startup, work at I don't know, some big health company in pharma or whatever, to get that grounding.
So in that sense, do you almost kind of not recommend students to go into the startup world straight away? Or
look, I think it has to come with a health warning, right? And so I think it's funny because there's the rational decision, and then there's the I don't know, there's the sort of more emotive decision, right? And I think it's kind of like what your parents tell you, right? They're telling you stuff in your best interest. And I think the reality is getting that solid grounding in a top tier institution is the sensible and rational decision to make, especially when you're from Oxford, Cambridge, etc. Because ultimately, what is Oxford or Cambridge, right? It's a brand, right? It's a brand, and it's a seal of approval saying this person has been vetted by an institution that's 800, 900 years old, that's churned out Nobel Prize winners and prime ministers, etc. But ultimately, it's a brand name, and so the great thing about getting a top tier institution is just another brand, right? It's just more sort of validation and social proofing that this individual knows what they're doing and they're of a certain standard, etc. Whereas when it's a startup brand or a less known brand, it's a lot more challenging. And I think in terms of going into a startup, I think it depends where you are on the curve. I think going into like a relatively like well-financed, slightly later stage hot tech company is probably a better bet now than like a Goldman or whatever. There's some amazing AI startups, for example. So starting somewhere like that actually might be better, because then you got that brand name and you're getting that sort of startup sort of feel. But I think I couldn't advise a student to go straight into founding a business. It obviously does work, and you just have to look at the number of dropouts who've founded billion-dollar businesses in America to see how well it can work. But ultimately, you're higher up on the risk curve, and so for every Zuckerberg, Gates, Jobs, there's countless others who probably haven't succeeded. But having said that, I mentioned my friend, right, who did very well out of it. So ultimately, you don't want to look like an idiot for that person to succeed, but if you're giving them sensible advice, that would be the safer option.
Yeah, going back to this idea of the brand, kind of, do you think there's a way to build your own personal brand, I guess, or kind of how would you go about doing that?
No, definitely, I think so. I think the keener you are, the more sort of the more you apply for scholarships and other sort of programs out there, the better, right? For example, I have like a friend or two who they all seem to be getting all these new scholarships and high-profile things that I'd never heard of, and they look amazing. And then I'm applying for them, but I'm already one step behind this person, right? Because they've researched all these things. Actually, one of the things I got was because someone else that I knew had got something, and so clearly they're going to the time to sort of self-promote themselves. And so I think definitely there is something you said there in terms of getting an edge. Obviously, you don't want to be too kind of pushy with it and too sort of forward with it. But I think definitely, in my experience, I mean, I'm astonished at how lazy I was at university in hindsight, if I'm totally honest. And I'm always amazed at how switched on people are graduating today. I think partly because when we were leaving university, broadband was just coming to fruition, right? Like you didn't have LinkedIn, you didn't have all these things, and so there's less pressure. It was harder to make an impact, but equally there was less pressure. Whereas I think you guys have, I'd say overall it's probably a slight disadvantage in a sense, because you have so much information, you have so much, and so standing out is a lot harder. And so I think, yeah, building a personal brand. I mean, the fact that you guys are engaging with something like CUFIS is already a great marker, right? It shows you're interested. Maybe if you want to be a trader, you've got a synthetic portfolio that's not got cash behind it, but you're doing that. Those sorts of things will make a difference. And there's so many fellowships and things out there, right, for young people that I never researched as much as I could. But I think definitely doing all those things make a huge difference. I think actually, the way they make the biggest difference is it's actually the networking side. If you just focus on finance and just do a few financing things, you sort of don't go down this rabbit hole. Whereas if you're doing sort of adjacent things, you might end up meeting someone who gives you a conversation or a contact to something else and that sort of thing. So I think, yeah, definitely there's a lot to be said for it. Just be careful and don't be that guy or girl though who's a bit too out there. Or have a trusted friend who'll tell you if you are being that person. but I think definitely there's a lot to be said for it. And I think unfortunately you guys, because you have so much available, it's a lot harder now to stand out.
Yeah, so with all that information, what do you think kind of the best way is to kind of sift through it and kind of organize your thoughts and kind of make the most of kind of the opportunities you have?
Yeah. No, I think definitely like LinkedIn, you've just got to be switched on with LinkedIn, right? First and foremost. Again, like I said, when I left uni, LinkedIn didn't exist, or like it just was coming out. I think there's a wealth of information there in terms of, in terms of being able to follow people or find out about opportunities as well through LinkedIn. There's also stuff you can do in terms of actually producing content as well, if there's certain things you're interested in. So I think being kind of engaged with the right platforms is one thing. Definitely applying for fellowships and researching things. Don't rest on your laurels because you got this internship at a top tier institution over the summer. There might be a 2-week fellowship that some prestigious organization's offering or whatever that you can get to. And the reason I say this is these things snowball, right? Those people who have 2 or 3 of those things by the time they're 25, they're then the ones getting the even more prestigious ones, when you're that age. They're the ones who've done a TED Talk, and suddenly because they've done the TED Talk, they're getting invited to other TED Talks. And my thing around those little deviations now can have huge impacts on your trajectories. And often it's like a sort of a niche as well. You might fit a certain sort of profile as well. That makes you like the person in that profile, and then suddenly you're like the sort of spokesperson for a particular demographic, right? And so I think it's important to apply yourself really. And I think kind of more directly to your point around all this information, etc. I think you see it as a process and have your process really locked down. You've got your CV, you've got your cover letter, you've got everything good to go. You're using Trello or some other platform to manage all your opportunities. You have a clear pipeline of like what you're applying to, what you're not applying to. Because if you get 2 or 3 of these sort of additional fellowship things on top of your, hopefully your shiny internship in the summer, you're already 2 steps ahead, right? And then that will then multiply. So I think, it's a bit unfair for me to give advice that I didn't really follow myself, to be honest. And so I guess, the good news is it does work out anyway, but that's one regret I had, is I think I could have engaged a lot more. But also hindsight, right? At the time, I was worried about finals and making sure I didn't get a 3rd or something. So, you don't necessarily have the time to do those things, but it's interesting because there are always some people who somehow they make the time, right? It's like that person who goes to the gym at 5 a.m. or whatever. There's some people just seem to somehow be able to do it, and so clearly, it's not an excuse to say you can't do it. And yeah, that's something I wish I did anyway.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's kind of a really helpful advice. And overall, I think that's kind of the end of that interview. If you got kind of any final advice or kind of a final piece to say,
just to say thanks for having me, and I hope that was really helpful. And yeah, like I said, I think the fact that you guys are part of CUFIS, you know, and I think if you're listening to this webinar, you're already, I'm guessing you're probably already ahead of the pack in terms of being engaged. You know, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So I think 10 years from now is the first time you have clarity on, you know, how your career's progressed, etc. I think for now, yeah, do as much as you can, but don't worry too much if it doesn't go exactly to plan, because the plan will change, and actually, you know, what seems like not the right move right now might be the best thing in the future. So yeah, but like, just to end with, thank you so much for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for coming.